SeatGeek is the easiest way to find the best deals on tickets to pretty much any live event. Concerts, sports, theater, comedy, whatever you want. Download the SeatGeek app today and enter promo code SEATS to save $20 on your first purchase.
Greetings and welcome into another episode of Sports Beat Kansas City. It is Rustin Dodd, the Royals beat writer here at the Kansas City Star, here with our second Royals podcast of the offseason. The first one we had last week, we had Bob Dutton on, and now we have former Bob Dutton protege. That's not the right word. Former Bob Dutton partner on the beat. Former Bob Dutton acolyte.
Former Bob Dutton bitch.
Yeah, I suppose. This is Sam Mellinger, columnist at the Kansas City Star. Sam, you're still out in Oakland after the Chiefs lost to the Raiders on Thursday night.
Yep.
Okay, so we were just briefly talking about this off air, and it's probably not going to be the most interesting fodder, but I'm still into this question. So there were many things that happened last night. We're recording this on a Friday, when the Chiefs lost to the Raiders on that final drive. But I'm still there was one play where it was 2nd and 10. I don't know what I think there was maybe a holding call or some sort of offensive holding that the Chiefs accepted the penalty and it made it 2nd and 20. Instead, it could have been 3rd and 10. And then the next play, Derek Carr hit like a 40-yard pass over the middle, so it didn't really matter. But I'm still wondering, do you think that was the right decision? Shouldn't they have just made it 3rd and 10? I mean, they were in 4-down territory. Obviously, they had to go for it on all 4 downs. But wouldn't the odds of holding a team on 3rd and 10 for 2 downs be better than 2nd and 20 if they had 3 downs to get 20 yards? I mean, I know the clock is a factor too. Is that did that decision at the time when you were watching the game live? I know you were writing a column at the moment, but what did you think of that decision?
It didn't stick out to me at the time, but now that you're talking about it, I mean, yeah, I could see that of just making it 3rd down. I mean, the difference is at that point you're giving them 2 plays to get 10 yards, so they need 5 yards per play, versus 3 plays to get 20, so they need 6.7 or whatever. So I can see that argument that you have to hit it deep a little bit, but the way secondary playing, you're right. I don't know that it really mattered, but I guess the way that the Chiefs secondary is playing, maybe 3rd down, you can figure it's one fewer play to get a holding or pass interference call.
Okay, well that does make sense. I was wondering the win probability stats would say, and if just the simple math of them making it 3 plays for 20 yards of 6.3, I guess, or 6 whatever that would be, 7.3. I can't do math.
6.7.
Yeah, 6.7. I guess that does make sense, but whatever. Hey, let's talk about the Royals. I know you're immersed in Chiefs season, but the Royals are now a couple of weeks removed from the end of their season. They finished 80-82, out of the playoffs for a second straight year. They obviously said goodbye, perhaps, to Eric Hosmer and Mike Moustakas and Lorenzo Cain and Alcides Escobar, and we're going to be talking about these guys for the next month. But let's kind of just get into the Royals offseason and where they go from here. You wrote a column a few weeks ago, or maybe it was about 2 weeks ago. The headline of the column is why Eric Hosmer is the key to it all for the Royals and how they're approaching all possibilities. And I'm going to read from your column. It said, at the beginning of the column, it was how Hosmer has been sort of key to the Royals' rise and their winning over the last 4 to 5 years. And now, perhaps one last time, Hosmer will determine the future of the Royals. Royals officials are making it clear that Hosmer is their top offseason priority. If they're able to re-sign him, then they could shed some payroll and make an aggressive offer to Mike Moustakas or Lorenzo Cain. If Hosmer signs elsewhere, the Royals will move to a contingency plan. And then Dayton Moore also said a few days later, in a conversation I had with him, he said, we can go one of two ways. We can decide to just gut the team the best we can and save as much money as possible and play for draft picks, and maybe that's ultimately what we end up doing. It's too early to predict that right now. I think there's some other things that we'd like to execute if possible and see what happens with our free agents. Everybody assumes that we're just going to get blown away in free agency and that we don't have a chance. That may be right, but I think everybody felt that way about Alex Gordon at the time. That fell back to us. You just never really know. So the Royals are sort of kind of offering a few hints, some obvious more than others, about what their offseason is going to look like. And I'm just wondering, having mentioned the column that you wrote and what Dayton has said to this point and what he said in his press conference a few days ago out at Kauffman Stadium, what do you think the Royals would like to do, and what do you think they would ultimately be forced into doing, over the next 2 to 3 months? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I think the ideal situation for them would be for Eric Hosmer to fall back to them, and they're able to sign him, and they're able to use that momentum internally and externally to sign, in my guess, Lorenzo Cain. I'm not basing this on anything other than just knowing him a little bit. He hasn't said anything like this. I just feel like Mike Moustakas wants to go back home. I think he wants to play in Southern California. I think the Royals would have to outbid, the Angels. But I think that's how they would like it to go, and then they could try to some payroll. They'd have to eat. They'd have to eat some salary, but I think they'd like to try and shed some payroll if they could to make all that stuff happen. I mean, you can do Soria or Hamill or Moss. I mean, there's some guys there that you can trade away, and maybe you have to eat 25% of the salary or whatever. But I think that's how they'd like to do it. I think what's going to happen is they're not going to be able to match the price of Hosmer, and I think that they're going to end up, kind of treading water a little bit, trying to find or might come back, on like a 2-year, $6 million. I don't know what would end up being, but certainly a relatively low price for a free agent. But just little filling holes where they can. See what happens next year. I mean, one thing you hear, not just from the Royals, but when you talk to, personnel people from other teams too, is day and age with the double wild card, the bar has been lowered substantially to get into the playoffs. The Royals, nobody thinks about this anymore, but 3 years ago the Royals stunk in July. That was not a good team, and they got hot and won the wild card game, played all the way to the 7th game of the World Series. The Twins in 2017 had no interest really in winning. I mean, that was a rebuilding job, and I don't know how many teams have traded away their closer at the deadline and then made a postseason run. They didn't really, that was not their intention. They were trying to build for the future. They were going to trade, Irvin Santana, maybe Brian Dozier. I mean, they were going to deal some guys, for the future, and they kind of backed in to the postseason a little bit. So I think that there's a template, there's a precedent for the Royals to, and they wouldn't have a terrible team. I mean, a lot of teams would love to have Salvador Perez. A lot of teams would love to have, Danny Duffy, Whit Merrifield, depending on what you think of Alex Gordon's last, month or so, if that's real, depending on how optimistic for Cuthbert, they've got some guys. There's still a lot of internal optimism about Raul Mondesi. So it wouldn't be, sort of the 2003 Royals that were just a complete fluke. But then, so I think that's what they do. They enter next season with that kind of team. And then if you get to June or July and you're 12 games out, then you start dealing guys and kind of embracing a rebuild. That's what I think is going to happen.
Okay, so I mean, it's obvious, or I guess it's clear that like the Royals' best chance to make the playoffs next year or even the year after would be if they re-signed Eric Hosmer and they brought back some of these guys and they had the core. Or not the core, but what would be left of the core sort of in place. That's sort of obvious. But I wonder, do you think that's in the best interest of the Royals long term? I mean, obviously re-signing Eric Hosmer, that's, I guess, unequivocally a win. But is like, is that enough to um, let the Royals like continue their window for the next 3 to 5 years, and they're not just necessarily playing into that sort of area where they're an average team for a sustained period?
Yeah, no,
And
I don't think so. No, yeah. I mean, I think Eric Hosmer is going to end up signing for about 6 years and $140 million. And that's a long contract and a lot of money. That's like 25 or 23 a year. They haven't paid anybody that much money. They haven't paid anybody that much money for that long. And I believe in Eric Hosmer. I think that he's actually going to age well. I think he's not even 28 yet. I think his birthday is in the next week or so, and he'll turn 28. It's relatively young for a free agent. He has a skill set that, it's diverse. He's athletic. He's a good defender. I mean, I think that he'll be a good player 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road. But no, I think the best thing for the long-term future of the Royals, and roll your eyes or whatever, but it would have been last winter not trading away Davis and saying that you want to compete in 2016. Or if you trade away Wade Davis, then embrace that rebuild. That to me is like sort of the original sin of all of this, that they didn't make a decision about whether they wanted to really, honestly, truthfully, genuinely go for it in 2017, or if they wanted to start preparing for, this post-Hosmer, Moose, Kane life that they're in now. And to me, I think you got to be all in or all in on a rebuild. And that middle ground is just not where you want to be. And if I'm hearing what you're saying, if I'm kind of reading between the lines or whatever, there's no way for the Royals to really honestly be all in right now. With they already have about $100 million obligated next year to, I think, 8 or 9 players, right? And so now you're going to add. So now it would be, if you sign Hosmer for, if I'm right about my guess, about 6 years, $140 million. They'll probably backload it a little bit, but still, that's at least $120 million committed to 9 or 10 guys. The payroll's probably not going to be able to be higher than 140-ish, 150. I mean, it's so you've got $25 million more dollars to, for 15 players, and I just don't know that that's a sustainable, smart way to go. And it's a weird thing, because you're right. Like if you could sign Hosmer with everything that you've put into him over the last, 9 years since they drafted him, I think you have to go for it. But I think there's a very good argument, and it's an argument that I would make, that the best thing for the Royals' future is to sit back and really try to embrace a rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I didn't state that, argument like very, very well, but it's the Royals finished 81-81 last year. They finished 80-82 this year, and that was, in 2016, Eric Hosmer had a great first half and a pretty mediocre to bad second half, and in 2017 he was great, and Mike Moustakas until he got hurt had a career season. Lorenzo Cain was very good. I mean, it's like, I guess the point is, is it worth the money and the effort to re-sign these guys when their peaks and where their performance may be at its highest doesn't necessarily fit with the Royals' future and window to contend going forward? I know the Royals have sort of discussed internally the idea of I don't know if bottoming out is the right way they would put it, or tanking. They would never use those words, but they would like to, the next time that they're have a team that can win a championship, they want to be sustainable, like to have success sustained over a decade, as opposed to, let's say that they had this sort of run from basically 2013 to 2017, so that's 5 seasons. I guess you could count 4 if you started in 14. But instead of a 4 or 5 year run, they want it to be, 10 to 12 year run where you're making the playoffs half the time. And to get back to that point, they really are going to have to go backwards and, maybe be mediocre to very bad for the next 2 to 3 seasons, and kind of aim for 2021 as the next time that they can contend. And as much as that will hurt in the short term, I just wonder if that's like the long-term vision, if if signing Hosmer or attempting to sign any of these guys is necessarily the right move right now.
Yeah. I mean, I've always kind of felt that there's value in losing, and there's not as much value in it now as there. Baseball has switched down the rules a little bit about how you can spend your money in the draft and things like that. But one of the sort of subtle, I haven't really written this, maybe I should, but one of the subtle kind of bad things about 2017 was, if you think about it, 2017 could not have gone worse for
the Royals. Well, their free agents had great years and they didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, and they still stunk. And not just that, but then they were on the on July. I mean, I don't have the results, the schedule and results right in front of me, but on or about July 15th, July 10th, something like that, there was it was still they were going to buy or sell, right? And then they made a push. And they had a playoff spot, right? Like on July 28th or whatever that date was, they were a game and a half or 2 games up, and holding on to a playoff spot. In that situation, there's no way that you sell, right?
Yeah.
You have to be a buyer, and so they traded. And they didn't give away a ton, but still, Puckett might end up being a decent major league pitcher, and I mean, those are pieces that you might want down the road, but they had to try and be a buyer, and made these trades, and then just faded at the end. And I mean, it just could not have gone worse.
No.
If you're going to go 80 and 82, at least have Eric Hosmer have a terrible year. At least have like Mike Moustakas, some injury that makes him signable for you next year. And maybe it's Chesler Cuthbert and Whit Merrifield and these guys that you have under club control. Alex Gordon's having a big year, something like that. That would be a lot more encouraging than what they have right now.
No, and I mean, I still think if you look at kind of what the market was for position players at the trade deadline, that I don't think the Royals have to feel too bad about what they didn't receive in terms of selling any of their players. I mean, certainly you would have added some assets and some guys and more talent to your system, but you weren't going to receive any kind of pillars of the next wave, I don't believe. I mean, if you look
right, yeah, they weren't going to make the John Smoltz trade or whatever, but they could have something.
Yeah,
something.
They'll get the draft picks for those 3 guys. They're going to give them qualifying offers, but that does take a little bit longer to turn that around.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
It'll be interesting moving forward. Okay, last thing on Hosmer, and then we can move forward. It's a little too early to know, but I find one of the most fascinating things about him is just who might be interested in him, because the market for him might be a little bit smaller than you would think.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Boston Red Sox are no doubt looking for middle of the order, middle of the order presence and power, and something to put in the middle of their lineup. They struggled offensively this year. They obviously need a first baseman. But once you get beyond them, it's harder to find like obvious fits for Hosmer. I mean, the Yankees have been discussed, and I think he does fit into their sort of future. They've got a young team and they've got a lot of money to spend, and I think Hosmer would be great for their clubhouse and would be the kind of guy that could take the pressure off their young players like Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez, and he would fit in the culture of New York, and he would probably fit in the culture of anywhere, but I think he's a fit there. But they also have Greg Bird, a young first baseman who's hit pretty well in the playoffs, and they potentially might want to save money for Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, who will be free agents next year. Maybe they don't want to give Eric Hosmer $150 or $160 million this offseason. And once you get beyond that, you've heard the Cardinals might be looking to make some moves this offseason. They could potentially need a first baseman and an upgrade there, although they do have Matt Carpenter, who they sort of switched over to that spot. The Angels, I guess, would be another team if they would be in the market to spend a lot of money this offseason. We'll see where they are, but like there aren't the obvious teams. I mean, you go down the list of teams, and a lot of teams have their first baseman. A lot of the big money teams have a first baseman moving forward. And I'm just wondering if maybe the market for Hosmer, much like it was for Gordon, will come back a little bit when we see the teams that are interested.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely possible. But I also think that those teams that we're talking about, that's a pretty good start, for a bidding war. If you've got Boston that definitely needs it, New York that might need it, Anaheim that I think that's a kind of a sneaky good fit that not a lot of people have been talking about. That's a pretty good start, and all you need is two. And sometimes Scott Boras only needs one because then he's always got the mystery
team. Yes.
So yeah, it's not it's not the hottest market in the world, but I think you could make an argument for a couple other guys, and depending if you prefer pitching or whatever. But Eric Hosmer might be the biggest free agent on the market. And he's the right age. He's got postseason success. He's not going to go cheap. You know what I mean? Like for all of the breaks that the Royals got, and I know people are going to roll their eyes because of how Gordon has played the last 2 years, but the breaks in that moment that brought Alex Gordon back to the Royals, that was still a 4-year, $72 million contract. They didn't get like a really big bargain. And Alex Gordon I think he was 32, when he signed that deal, right? Alex Gordon at 32 is not nearly, sort of the asset or the player that Eric Hosmer at 28 is. So, it's still going to be a big number. I think the Royals may be able to, if they get sort of whatever the equivalent this winter is of Jason Hayward signing, with the Cubs, that took away the Cubs as a bidder for Gordon and those kinds of things. If they get those breaks, they're still going to have to make a really big offer. And this goes along the lines of the last thing we were just talking about, that in some ways I think maybe with the best thing for the Royals future may be almost re-signing Eric Hosmer. We offered 6 years 120 and he ended up 6 years 140, and we understand it. He's not going to turn down $20 million, but we gave it a try, like something like that.
Yeah, well, the Cardinals, I believe they offered Albert Pujols I believe they offered him about
analogy.
200. They had like $200+ million, and they ended up getting outbid by the Angels, and then the Cardinals have been able to say, oh, we made the prudent, smart decision by not re-signing him, although they did offer Albert Pujols like $200 million, I believe, or something close to that. And Sam, I will say, too, that now that you've reminded me of the mystery team, that I can't stop thinking about all the mystery teams we're going to hear about this offseason with, hey, there's a mystery team on Mike Moustakas, and it's the Kane, the Giants, and the Nationals, and there's a mystery team. So
it's Scott Boras' favorite club.
Yeah. Okay. Next thing I had for you. The Royals had a press conference on Wednesday, or I should say Dayton Moore had a press conference, his season-ending one that was sort of delayed because he was in Arizona for instructional league and meetings, and then I think he went to the Dominican Republic to check in on some players last week. But one interesting thing that came out of this, or at least I found it interesting, it's a very Royals move, a very on-brand thing for them to do, a very on-brand move for Dayton Moore. But Dayton is taking his staff to Atlanta next week for leadership meetings and character meetings, and they're going to spend a lot of time at the Dr. Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, which is, I think it's like near downtown Atlanta. And I'm not exactly sure, if they're just going to kind of go through the museum and tour, and I don't know exactly what it's going to all entail, but they are going to spend a lot of time down there and have some organizational meetings, which I think this is mere coincidence, but I suppose it is sort of funny that Dayton Moore is going down to Atlanta for 4 or 5 days,
totally.
and taking his entire staff. Is he skipping out for a lunch with John Schuerholz? Is he going to be, there's plenty of jokes to be made, but I guess this is the roundabout way of saying that the Atlanta Braves still do not have a general manager, and Dayton Moore has said on the record many times that he is committed to Kansas City and he is in the job that he's supposed to be in. Yet he has never unequivocally stated that he'll be back next season. Now, some of this is sort of obvious business 101 about maintaining your negotiating leverage in your job or your next job or wherever you're going to be. But I guess simple question: is Dayton Moore going to be the Royals general manager in 2018? The answer seems to be yes, but I suppose there is some sort of a little bit of intrigue out there, as opposed until that job is filled, or until Dayton Moore announces a new contract extension in Kansas City, or some combination of the two.
Yeah, I think he'll be back. I do. I've talked to him about it, and I'm willing to be naive on this, right? I think that he has his reasons for not saying what he could say and saying what he has said. But, one thing I keep thinking about is he could have had the Braves job at least twice by now after he left, and he hasn't. And, look, like maybe you say, okay, well, he saw Moose and Hosmer and came through, and now he's ready to bounce. But I don't know that he really operates that way, and I don't know that this will be the last baseball job that he has. It's a weird thing because he's only 50. And, if he was 65 or 70 or whatever, I think he'd just retire and run the Urban Youth Academy. I really do. But he's 50 and he's still got, some years in him. And, he makes a really good salary, but he's got kids to put through college and he's got to work just like everybody else. And so the one thing, so I'm not here to tell you that Dayton Moore is going to be the general manager for the Royals for the next 10 years or 20 years or whatever. But I think that if he leaves, I think it'll be something like, it could be the Braves. It could be the Braves this winter, but it'll be something. He's not going to leave just for another GM job. I think that if he leaves, it might be for something like what Friedman took with the Dodgers or what Theo Epstein took with the Cubs, of just, a president's job, a huge staff underneath him, and I don't think insignificantly a really big salary. And I don't know what he makes now, but some of those teams could blow. I mean, they could double his salary, and it would be in line with what some of the other GMs are making around baseball. Like that. That's the kind of thing that I think that he might leave for. But I also believe that, the most important thing that a GM can have is a good relationship with the owner. And I think that Dayton and David Glass have a terrific relationship. And which, by the way, I think it's a terrific relationship for Royals fans, because Dayton has been the first person to kind of break through and get David Glass to, do some things that maybe he's not comfortable doing. And I don't know that Dayton feels like he would have that in Atlanta. And I mean that literally. I just think he's unsure, but he knows that he has it. So I think as long as David Glass is in Kansas City, I think Dayton Moore wants to be in Kansas City. But, David Glass is also 82 years old, not to be morbid, but he's not going to be the owner of the Royals anymore. And if Dan Glass taking over as the man, I don't know how much longer he would want to be in Kansas City after that.
Sure. I will say, too, that it's easy to say, hey, it's an obvious time to leave Kansas City. They're about to embark on this new rebuilding process, and the Braves, for all their questions with Major League Baseball and the investigation that's going on there, and they might be docked with some taking some of their players away or draft picks or whatever is going to happen there. They do have one of the best. They do have one of the best farm systems in baseball, and more resources, and so for all, like, it makes sense, I suppose. But I think, to me, that almost means it doesn't make as much sense, because I think Dayton is the kind of guy that cares about his reputation and those sort of optics, and I'm not sure he would want to be seen as the guy who was sort of cutting and running right as Eric Hosmer left town. And also the Urban Youth Academy, you mentioned it. I mean, it just had a soft opening this year and is going to have a harder opening next year, and that will actually start to kind of do what it's meant to do. And I think he kind of wants to see that process through, and so it doesn't seem to me like the logical time to leave. But you never know. It's never smart to predict what people will do in their jobs or lives, because you can't obviously be inside their own head. So Sam, let's wrap up here. I've got one other funny thing from the Dayton Moore press conference on Wednesday. Something that kind of like stuck out to me, even though it was just sort of an offhanded remark. But somebody asked him about kind of the next wave of players, and he sort of brushed aside talking about anybody that hasn't been in the major leagues before. But he started talking about Raul Mondesi and Jorge Soler and Cheslor Cuthbert, and he mentioned Jorge Bonifacio, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something very like, Jorge Bonifacio, is he Moises Alou? I don't think so, but I see a lot of similarities there. And then he sort of talked about the traits that Jorge Bonifacio has, and so I tweeted that out, and obviously there were a lot of jokes about Jorge Bonifacio peeing on his hands. So
Sure.
But no, I guess my question though is less about Jorge Bonifacio and more about that just group of players. I'm just wondering, heading into 2018, if you had to rank guys in terms of who will have the best seasons in 2018, and I guess maybe also who you think is in line to have the best careers in a Royals uniform, how would you rank the four players of Bonifacio, Mondesi, Soler, and Cuthbert?
Bonifacio, Soler, Mondesi, and Cuthbert. I think Mondesi has the highest ceiling. If all four of those guys max out, I think Mondesi would be the best player. I think Mondesi, people may roll their eyes, but I think Mondesi has a chance to be like, sort of Francisco Lindor, but less on base and more strikeouts. I think he's got that kind of power, speed, defense combination. I think he can be a terrific player. Now, he hasn't hit. I know he went like 5 of 11 or whatever it was after his call-up, right? But he hasn't hit in the big leagues. But, for Royals fans, we used to pay a lot of attention to what happened in the leagues, and we don't really anymore. But he did really well in Omaha. Hit over 300, had some power, got on base a little bit. I don't really expect that to translate to the big leagues. That's going to be his big thing, is just, pitch recognition and, and maintaining contact. But, all right. So Mondesi, I still think there's some potential, but I'm going to put him fourth.
Sorry,
probably.
who was that? You cut out for a sec.
I still think there's some potential in Soler, some power in that bat, but I think right now it's hard to put him anywhere other than fourth of those four. So I guess I would say Bonifacio, Mondesi, Cuthbert, and then Soler.
Okay, so that's in terms of their 2018 production.
Yeah, I think so. Wait, what did I say between Mondesi and Cuthbert? I think Cuthbert second, Mondesi third if we're talking about 2018. If we're talking about career, I think that Mondesi could have the best, or maybe the second best of those four. He's talented, man. Like he really is. He wouldn't be the first talented guy to to do well at AAA and never be able to hit in the big leagues. But I don't know how many. He's 22, right? Just turned 22, I think, a month ago. I don't know how many guys that young with bodies like that, switch hitting shortstops with that combination of power and speed. How often do you see something like that?
Yeah, and if you just look at and guys that get to the major leagues that early, and I mean obviously, you want to see some production, but generally speaking, if you just pull up Baseball Reference and look at every major league player who made the major leagues by age 21, almost all of them at some point will have productive major league careers. There's maybe they don't. There's probably an exceptions to the rules. There's many of them, but by and large, if a guy's that talented, they generally will be productive at some point on some degree. And I will say, I think the biggest question for me for Mondesi is things that we can't know right now, and I think he's going to mature, and I think he's going to grow up as well. But it's more the intangible qualities. For Alcides Escobar, for all his flaws in terms of his offense and just the kind of the player he's been, he's the kind of guy that shows up every day and plays and doesn't take plays off. And I think
he wasn't always like that though. Remember when his first couple of years in Kansas City, he did have some focus errors.
Then I think that's
that he got better with it. But yeah, he didn't come like that.
Then I think that's maybe an optimistic side of things for Mondesi. That's an optimistic way to look at him, because I think once he grows into that and learns sort of how to play and to focus every day at the major league level, the Royals I think that's when he'll reach his ceiling and really take off. And I think whereas like I think a guy like Bonifacio, I think he has those intangible qualities and that sort of maturity and kind of those qualities already. And I think that's something that is going to allow him to – his ceiling's not as high, but I think you feel like the floor is not as low because –
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Because I think he's the kind of guy that – he showed it this year, but has those sort of the maturity and the I'm trying to think of another word for the intangible qualities that he has, but it's escaping me. But he's got kind of a calm, collected, doesn't really get rattled at all. It seems like the moment's never too big for him, and I think those will allow him to be. We'll see how good he is long term, but I think his floor is pretty high. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, what else you got going on this weekend, Sam? You're gonna enjoy some family time out in the Bay Area.
That's a fact. Yeah. Just gonna be outside, play with the kids. It'll be good.
Yeah. So the Chiefs do not play again until a week from Sunday. So there's a little bit of
a week from Monday.
Oh, that's the Broncos game at home.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, this is rather nobody really cares about this, but has this been about the worst season of all time for football deadlines? I believe the Chiefs have played 8 games and 4 of them have been in prime time, and then their next game's in prime time too. So 5 of their first 9 games will be in prime time.
You are allowed a maximum of 6 primetime games, and the Chiefs have 6. Yeah.
But okay.
It's been terrible. Struggle is real.
Well, it's very front-loaded too.
Mm-hmm.
So, well. All right. Well, Sam. Hey, thanks for doing this, man.
All right. Yeah.
Hopefully we can connect later on this offseason when we'll chat about the mystery teams and what teams might be interested in Eric Hosmer and Michael Stachys.
Anytime.
Okay. Thanks, guys, for listening, as always, and we'll be back next week with some off-season Royals discussion. Thanks to Sam. This has been Rustin Dodd, and we will see you soon.